I just like to, smoke a joint every now and then.
Good people don't smoke marijuana.
You dick!
Welcome to VoteProPot-Cast, brought to you by VoteProPot.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 9 of VoteProPot-Cast. I'm Phil Adams.
I'm Jay Britton. I'm Andrew McCready's.
In this episode of VoteProPot-Cast, Andrew, Jay, and I present a roundup of the cannabis news of the day. We'll start with an update on some of the hot cannabis legislative initiatives in states like Michigan, Missouri, Utah, Wisconsin, and Texas, as well as some news on the federal front in both Congress and the DEA. We'll also talk about a movement in Seattle to vacate hundreds of convictions on simple possession, and follow up with an important discussion about how all cannabis legal reform is not the same, nor is it all good reform. Then we'll give you a financial report on the growing uncertainty surrounding marijuana stocks and one on the high cost of entry into the dispensary business. We'll talk about some surprisingly tough restrictions on cannabis use in Las Vegas, of all places. And finally, a report on a more humane way to cook lobster. We would love to hear from you. As you know, we're working on some pretty interesting and important issues here, and we need your input and we need your activity. So please check us out at VoteProPot.com.
You can send us an email at VoteProPot@gmail.com. And please like and follow us on Facebook at Facebook.com/VoteProPot.
And if you like what you hear on Vote Pro Podcast, here's what I want you to do right now. Hit the pause button, swipe to the sharing function on your app, and share this episode with someone you know and who you think would benefit. Make sure you subscribe to Vote Pro Podcast so you don't miss any of the episodes, and neither do the folks you share it with. So let's get to the news. A lot of what's going on in cannabis news has to do with politics. And I know we don't like that, but that's you can't take the politics out of politics. And this article is from Cannabis Business Times, and it's titled 7 Important Cannabis Narratives in the 2018 Midterm Elections, which are coming right up. As we look ahead to those elections, there are a lot of public debates and other issues before the voters in a number of states: Michigan, North Dakota, Missouri for medical, Utah for medical. And there's plenty of other races are kind of distinguishing themselves from one another by their stances on cannabis, the candidates, that is. Here's a couple of things that's going on. In Michigan may be the first state to bring an adult use cannabis market to the Great Lakes regions and, more broadly, to the Midwest. According to a September Click on Detroit poll, the legislation initiative is supposed to, it is supported among the majority of Michigan voters by a margin of 56% to 38%. Significant majority, I think we should say. Michigan voters approved a loosely regulated medical marijuana law in 2008. And in recent years, the state has gone to pretty great lengths to tighten its oversight, combing through business applications under restrictive timelines. Michigan's Governor Rick Snyder is term limited. The Cannabis Business Times report says, so we turn to Democratic candidate Gretchen Whitmer and Republican candidate Bill Schwede. And I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Schwede balls.
Schwede balls. Bill Schuette. Democrat Gretchen Whitmer has vocally supported the legislation initiative and has discussed her plans for overseeing an equitable rollout. Schwede, on the other hand, the state's attorney general, has opposed past cannabis reform in Michigan and has said that he will vote against the adult use issue in November. So we've got a clear line of distinction. If you live in Michigan and you're voting in the governor's race and you favor, as 56% do, you may just decide to vote for Democratic candidate Gretchen Whitmer. North Dakota, and I'll just buzz through a couple of these. North Dakota voters will decide whether to set an adult use cannabis market for its population of fewer than 1 million. If passed, this would be the quickest that a state has jumped from medical approval to adult use approval. I'm getting the feeling that adult use is the term we use now in place of personal use, which is the term we were using in place of recreational use.
Correct.
So it's gone from recreational to personal to adult. Because
it's all about the marketing.
Well, because it's all about the marketing, and the politics of it is, this is for adults, this is not for children.
That's correct.
Let's all be adult about it.
Right.
Missouri, the article says Missouri is without a doubt host to the most active cannabis legislation season in the U.S. right now. Voters in the Show Me State will be shown 3 separate medical cannabis ballot initiatives in November. And then it goes through each one step by step. There's a lot to this. You may want to check this out at Cannabis Business Times. Utah's medical cannabis campaign is being heavily supported by one of our allies, the Marijuana Policy Project, and heavily opposed by the Mormon Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as one might expect. Wisconsin, while non-binding voter questions don't mean much in the legal sense, the types of voter referendums, which really should be referenda, that will appear in counties across Wisconsin this November will surely push the public discourse in the general direction of legalization. So that's moving in the right direction. I like what Wisconsin is turning into politically these days. So much a more interesting state than it was. And finally, Texas. And this one you don't usually see on the list of initiatives, but the prevailing narrative across the American political landscape in 2018 is whether the House or Senate will flip to Democratic control. This would inevitably open the floor to more open cannabis reform debates. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, it's a big issue.
Do you think if it flipped? Do you think if Congress flipped, we'd be on a smoother path to cannabis reform legislation?
Likely. I think so.
It would be smoother, but I don't know. I think the current political situation has motivated a lot of pro-pot and a lot of other issues as well because the conservative effort has increased. So therefore, I think some of the people involved in reform have sort of stepped up their game that they wouldn't have had Hillary won.
That's interesting. That's interesting because my impression of the Trump campaign is that it seems to be going in 2 different directions at once, but mostly in the enforcement position. They like the medical, or they like marijuana to be illegal, and they want to enforce it. But I think that's mostly the Justice Department, and that's, of course, Jeff Sessions. Donald Trump, the president, is not such a big fan of Jeff Sessions, as we probably know by now. And he has indicated, hey, if they pass a legislative reform initiative in Congress, I'll sign it. Or I'll probably sign it, or I might sign it. You never know with Trump. He might or he might not. We'll just see what happens.
Well, he indicated that during the campaign as well.
Yeah. So I don't know what to think about it on the federal level, but those are some of the state level issues going on.
Okay, to switch that around a little bit, right now, recently, the president was at the United Nations, and they had a General Assembly meeting where they discussed the world drug problem, and President Trump is kind of strong-arming some of these smaller countries into escalating their war against cannabis and drugs.
Well, I know he is for opioids, but I'm not. I wasn't, like fentanyl and some of these, but I didn't know that he was including marijuana with that. If that's
absolutely
that would be troubling. That's
yes,
troubling.
Absolutely, right. So I mean, because during the campaign, I thought he said that he was sort of in favor of reform.
Well, I got that impression, but
yeah. Oh, he certainly said he was in favor of states' rights in the states it being left up to the
Well,
states.
if that's what I think that's the right. If that's what he's saying, I will agree with that. Let the states decide.
Now,
Yeah, but we need more than that. We need federal change because that's
Well, I think federal change means let the states decide. I think federal needs to stay the hell out of it.
well. I think
Entirely.
Schedule 1 needs to be wiped.
That's number one.
As long as cannabis is Schedule 1, you're still going to have. I mean, the federal law takes precedence.
That's right.
So if it goes,
So
if
that's
it goes
the first thing to
court-
go. That's step one.
Right.
okay, now did you hear
That's what has to
the
happen.
DEA is encouraging the federal government to allow more growers to grow cannabis for medical research. Now, the reason they're doing that is because they don't want to take it off Schedule 1. So this is trying to relieve the pressure a little bit of taking it off Schedule 1 if they allow a little more medical. I believe that's what they're doing.
Was there any statement as to what they're saying is why they're?
They said it was because they wanted to reduce opioid production. They wanted to increase cannabis growth and reduce opioid production.
Well, one doesn't necessarily mean the other.
Exactly. And Andrew's point is well taken. Yeah.
Well, in states where recreational medical cannabis is legalized, the opioid deaths and overdoses are down.
Aha.
The question is why the dance? Why the dance? Why not just a movement to take it off Schedule 1 for crying
Because they
out
don't want to take it off Schedule 1.
But why?
It's
But
their
why?
cash cow. It's the only thing I can think of.
How is it the DEA's cash cow?
Because they arrest more
Yeah, I
people
don't-
every
I don't
year
understand that.
for cannabis possession than all violent crimes combined.
Arresting people
But
costs
how do they
money.
make money off?
Doesn't make money.
What? No, it increase the more arrests that a police department has.
Well, I guess in
more money they get.
fines and legal stuff, yeah. I guess they do. I guess there is a revenue
That's true.
stream.
Right, you go out and make an arrest. It's easy to smell the pot on them,
And
or
typically
if
they're
in the air.
nonviolent, so you don't have to worry about.
You know, So and also you go, man, it's no big deal, man. You'll
Are we
be
to the
home before
point
dinner. You
where
know,
we're believing, and I'm not saying we're not. Are we at the point where we're saying that the Federal Drug Enforcement Agency is deliberately preventing any legalization efforts because they want to arrest more people for more money?
Yeah, I don't
some
know
people
if I
believe
buy
that. And you can understand, from my perspective, I understand why they think that. If you consider the reason they made it illegal in the first place was all monetary for industrial hemp more than cannabis, and they use the cannabis aspect, the psychotropic cannabis, as opposed to industrial, as a tool to vilify and go after minorities. I mean, that's the reason they did it in the first place.
I mean, it squares with their past, I guess, doesn't it?
Well, that leads to a story I've got here from theroot.com by Michael Harriet, dated September 24th. Seattle throws out 15 years of marijuana convictions. Citing the war on drugs' disproportionate impact on people of color, judges in Seattle have agreed to vacate the marijuana convictions of hundreds of people who were punished for pot possession before the state made weed legal. According to the Seattle Times, in April, City Attorney Pete Holmes filed a motion asking the city's 7 municipal court judges to vacate the convictions of anyone charged with misdemeanor possession between 1996 and 2010. Holmes, who was elected in 2010,
96 to
decided
2010.
Yeah.
Wow.
Holmes, who was elected in 2010, decided to stop prosecuting minor weed offenses when he took office. So that gets back to your point, Andrew. And this has been a big push by the advocates on our side. Is as we're making this legal, what happens to these people who have, convictions for minor possession or worse, or sitting in jail?
They need to be released, and they need to have their records expunged.
Well,
Period.
it's. I think the big deal are these people who have it on their record, and it's preventing them from getting jobs, getting loans, and right. So if you're the governor of a state, you go, well, I want the economy of my state to pick up a little bit, and I want more people to get better jobs. I'm going to expunge their records for minor marijuana so they can get better jobs. It's better for our state. It's better for our economy.
Makes
it's better
sense
for
to
the
me.
people. And guess what? They're going to love it, and there are more people going to vote for me because I just did something that made sense.
I mean,
help
it
people.
seems like a no-brainer to me.
Well, yeah. And he says possession of marijuana charges prosecuted in Seattle Municipal Court between 1996 and 2010 disproportionately impacted persons of color in general. especially African Americans. So that was his push, and that's the point you were making.
That's true nationwide, though. Isn't that true, Andrew?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, that's also a good way for a governor to go, listen, I have an African-American community here where a large percentage of them are living below poverty and are struggling. And if all of a sudden we can expunge some of their records so they can go out and get better jobs and get loans and grow and thrive, that just makes sense. You want to help them.
You hear this, Republican candidates? Get on the train, man.
Not only candidates, but your Republican voters. We need them to understand this.
Well, yeah. As the voters go, so goes the candidate. So you're right.
This affects 542 people. So it's not a huge number of people, but it's a start.
But if I was on that list,
well, it'd be good. It's going to be good.
Exactly.
It's going to be
Exactly.
interesting to find out the results. See what happens. Are some of these people, are they going to be getting better jobs? Are they going to get loans? Are they going to,
Right.
Is anyone going to track that? I wonder.
Well,
I'm sure they will.
Think.
Someone will for sure.
Well, do it, somebody.
No, I have a news. I have a news article that I think kind of relates. Now, police in 2 states with marijuana initiatives on their ballot this November are using their official social media accounts to campaign against these measures. And some people are saying that that's a violation of election laws. Now, in Utah, the police were using their social networking platforms to urge people to vote against and to reject Proposition 2, which would legalize medical marijuana in the state.
Manner? You mean like on Facebook and stuff?
Yeah, the same man. They're campaigning against it. Now, in North Dakota, a law for recreational use, and the sheriff started using their social networking platforms to campaign against it, against their Measure 3 is what they call it, I believe. And all these people came up and said, well, you can't do that. And he went, I don't give a shit. I'm doing it anyway.
Watch me.
Watch me. Yeah.
That's messed up. Now, what is he a sheriff or is he? So he's elected. So people listening who are in that jurisdiction, vote that asshole out. I mean, that's how it works.
This is Utah?
That was North Dakota.
North Dakota. Okay. Yeah, we were just talking about
the first one was Utah. The second one was North Dakota.
Andrew, you make a good point, and I'd like to hear you make it again because you do a very good job of it about people thinking that it's only a matter of time before cannabis is legal everywhere. What do you say to that?
Well, that may be true, but now is not a time to rest on our laurels and give up thinking, okay, we've already won this battle. The battle is far from over, and this is a perfect example of these little laws in smaller in smaller districts and communities or states, for that matter, that are just unrealistic and awful. I mean, those are the things we got to keep an eye on. And the people that encourage laws like that are the people you need to vote out. And those are the things you need to call your representative's office, knock on his door, and go, guys, this is wrong. This is inhuman. It's dumb. It's counterproductive.
That's dumb.
Everything you're doing is the only people you're helping are the drug cartels. You're destroying lives and you're helping the black market.
The discrepancy between laws from one jurisdiction to another are just crazy. You're in Seattle or Portland, Oregon, or something, and the difference between there and going to Utah or what did you say, North Dakota, South Dakota? I mean, the difference is ridiculous from one extreme to the other, where it's legal to a felony for the same thing. It's crazy. It doesn't make sense.
It's part of the federalist system, and it's if you're somebody in Utah and you don't want any kind of cannabis legalization, well, you vote for the candidates who support that.
That's true.
And the people of Utah get to decide differently from the people of California. And if you don't like the laws in Utah, well, you can move to California or wherever. And that's federalism. So you're going to have drastic differences, but it doesn't mean it isn't weird.
Right. So every state should be responsible for sort of setting their guidelines for their state. And every state is different. Like I'm sure in Alaska, it's against the law to feed polar bears, but not in Florida.
Really? What do they do at the zoo?
Get some hungry polar bears in the zoo in Florida, man.
This comes from the business world, and this is from a website called The Motley Fool. Those who invest are familiar with this one. And the article is entitled, "Marijuana Stocks Are Doomed for a Colossal Collapse. This Chart Shows Why." And can't show you the chart, but and this is something, I invest, so I listen to some of the investment shows on the radio in the morning, and they've been talking about this kind of pot stocks, they call them. There's a lot of uncertainty around them. It seemed as if at one point, and still a lot of them that are doing well, but I'll just read you what this article says. The quote-unquote potcom bubble, is it about to pop? That's probably the biggest fear for investors who have already jumped into marijuana stocks or who have considered doing so. After all, Tilray's, which is listed on the NASDAQ, share price has skyrocketed 270% in just 1 month.
Wow.
Another one from the New York Stock Exchange, Canopy Growth, and another one, Afria, which is on the NASDAQ. Those stocks have more than doubled during the same period. Kronos Group isn't far behind with an 80% gain. But the question is this a bubble that's about to burst? And this article believes, well, looks like it.
Yeah, a lot of the I've been listening to a lot of the Wall Street talking heads are comparing it to the .com bubble in 1995 to 2000, when
yes,
the bottom
where the stocks were just vastly overpriced, and came down to earth.
Right.
And I think the same thing is true with the cryptocurrencies. Definitely with Bitcoin, that went up to a very high degree and then came back down to earth.
Right.
Well, the cannabis industry is sort of it's a new industry and it's not very stable. So, and since we have so many people still fighting it, and considering federal laws and tax laws are concern. It's no business is really on stable ground. You never know what could happen. So I could see how some businesses in some states could be doing very well one day, and the next day, man, their stock could plummet.
Well, that's true. And there's also, when you're talking this kind of money, there are banks that get involved, and the banks have to cover their butts. There are insurers who get involved, and for the very reasons you're saying, the uncertainty of the laws, there's an expectation, I think, that at some point when cannabis is legal or nearly completely legal, there's going to be a lot of money in this. The article says, first, it's important to understand just how astronomically high the valuations of marijuana stocks are right now. Just as we were saying, people expect these companies to grow. And that's the right response. Investors care much more about the future than they do about the past.
I think that a lot of the businesses in America are going through difficulty because if you're in the cannabis industry, you can only be in one state. All your business now, granted, they might be opening up businesses in each state under the same name, but for the most part, you can't open up one company and do business in more than one state. And you have the federal government coming after you, have the banking regulations coming after you. That's a challenge, to say the least. So, but what just happened was Canada just legalized it nationally. So all these businesses in the United States are all eyeing Canada, and all of them are starting to invest in Canada. They're all moving up to Canada to get their businesses strong and stable. And then as soon as it's taken off Schedule 1 and the banks go, okay, we'll take your money, the floodgates are going to open and the race is on.
Well, I think that's true. And one thing about stocks that a lot of people will counsel you on is that if for as high as you can calculate the growth potential or the valuations, you can also kind of calculate that much volatility. So if something potential, you can expect a lot of volatility on the way. And I think that's very true for these stocks as well. Having said that, the cannabis industry is not going anywhere, and it's going to be a big market over the next however many years. But But in the near term, you can expect that uncertainty is going to rule the day.
Yeah, definitely. I've got an article here related to the business side. One of the complaints about startup businesses in the cannabis industry is that it's mostly for rich people, which in this article is from the cannabisindustry.org. It says, how much does it actually cost to open a dispensary? So they don't give you a bottom line number here, but they give you some idea, and it's big bucks. So it says the first step is licensing, and they say licensing, depending on the jurisdiction, is going to cost you at least $5,000. In some places, a lot more.
In Maryland, it's $45,000 a year.
Right, exactly. Places like Washington State, the number of licenses that are granted are capped. So what happens is people get a license and then they'll sell it. So there, you're going to pay at least $25,000 for that license because they're all given out. So it's basically a waiting list. There's capital requirements for a lot of jurisdictions. So in other words, they'll depending on where you are, when you apply for a license, a local government may require proof that you have, liquid assets,
Cash on hand.
They may want you to have enough to run a business for 2 years. So that could be hundreds of thousands. And then, of course,
it's like that for liquor licenses in some jurisdictions.
It is. And then, of course, there's the leasing of space. And like we talked about in an earlier show, in some jurisdictions, it costs more to lease space for a cannabis business than it would for another business because of the risk taken by the landlords and the banks and so forth.
So it helps if you own the property.
The other thing is the banks. Most banks refuse to take the risk of cannabis businesses because of the federal illegality. So some banks will charge you up to $2,000 in holding fees every month just to run your business. So they charge you $2,000 for them to hold your money because of the risk. So anyway, the bottom line is, for the average startup dispensary, you are looking at literally hundreds of thousands to $1 million. So,
In marketing, we call that barriers to entry.
Or
exactly.
You could also spend many millions.
Exactly. So, definitely. Now, the good news is, that leads the way to small business too. Startups and creative ideas and people who are doing, craft cannabis things and that kind of stuff. So there's still room for the little guy, but the first step for most states that become legal is obviously growing in dispensaries. And sadly, it's very limited who can get in on that. You got to have and Andrew, you can speak to that because you were involved in the Maryland licensing and when it first became law, and you saw it, right? You saw how much.
I was at the meetings when they were discussing the regulations.
Yeah, and who got the licenses?
Well, you had to have some
rich white guys, right?
Definitely, yeah. Well, a great majority of them. Despite the fact that cannabis has been legalized for adult use in 9 states now, 8 or 9 states. Last year, marijuana arrests for simple possessions have gone up.
What?
That's crazy.
Yes.
I read that too. That's nuts.
Last year, there were 599,000 arrests for simple marijuana possession, and that was up from 587,000 in 2016.
But are those arrests in states that are legal, or have they gone up?
It's gone up in other states, and like arrests for simple possessions in Colorado have all but dried up, unless you're a minor.
Wow. What is that attributed to?
I don't know. I think is it the low hanging fruit? The cops are still just going after the low hanging fruit, and still consistently, it's people of color.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. It's an easy arrest.
Overwhelmingly, people of color. Disproportionately, people of color.
Mm.
Now, and meanwhile, there's over 100 deaths a day caused by opioids, and they're spending all these resources and how many hours of police of law enforcement working hours are used to arrest and process these people for simple possession when 100 people a day are dying from opioids.
600,000. Just under, right? Just under
more than all violent crimes combined.
That's
It's
crazy.
crazy.
I mean, stop and take that in for a minute, folks. I mean, more than all the violent crimes. And this statistic is according to whom?
The article was on Forbes, and it was FBI data.
More than all violent crimes combined. Simple possession, people who are otherwise law-abiding citizens going to jail and watching rapists and murderers come and go while they sit. It's got to stop. It's got to stop. This is an article from a Canadian website called Maclean's. And the article is today's cannabis much higher in potency than 25 years ago? Now, it's been more than 25 years since I smoked any of the potent weed. But I can tell you that even back then, 30 years ago, it was getting a lot more potent, at least from my perspective. But here's what the article says. Thanks to science, get ready for a whole new experience. A lot of our fuzzy feelings toward legalization may be based on hazy memories of decades past rather than the high-potency strains available today. It quotes a fellow named Jonathan Page, an adjunct professor in the botany department at the University of British Columbia. He says, hippies I knew growing up grew cannabis outside in their gardens as they still do today. But it wasn't like there was a real push for super high potency. People would harvest too early or sometimes smoke not just the flowers, but also the leaves, which have some THC content, but not a lot. I think there was a general lack of understanding on how to increase potency. Well, that's clearly not true today. They are definitely increasing and I guess adjusting the potency in terms of not just THC, but other cannabinoids, other compounds.
The ratios between the THC and the CBDs. See, what happened was during cannabis prohibition, the growers were,
the early days.
Well, in the early days, they were growing it outside. We're getting a lot of brickweed from Mexico, and that was a combination of male and female plants. There was a lot of stems and seeds in it, and that was like the whole plant. And then with the increase in surveillance, I guess they could, they're using helicopters flying over and started busting everyone. It went underground, or should I say went indoors. And that's when they realized if you grew the cannabis plant, if you're growing cannabis plants and you kill all the male plants before they mature and you have only female plants and they never get fertilized, they never get pollen, what happens, and while the female plant is waiting to get pollinated, it grows more and more of these trichomes, which are like little mushrooms that are, let's say, they're sticky, they're like sap, and that's what the pollen sticks to. So, in its desire to catch some pollen, it produces more and more of these trichomes, and you get what we call sensimine, and it's just these bigger, larger buds that have way more THC, because that's where all the compounds are concentrated, are in the flowers. So what happened while these growers were figuring out better ways to grow plants, and they were experimenting with hydroponics and different types of nutrients that they would feed these plants. And in addition to that, they were supplementing the air with more CO2, which would increase the yield and the potency. And then they were trying to get more oxygen to the roots and CO2 to the tops of the plants. And then they were doing the optimum amount of time under light. And then they're doing the optimum amount of temperature and wind, because that's why you see these pictures of grows with fans everywhere. And the wind really helps the plant get stronger and grow more, have a greater yield. So they've taken all these. In the meantime, they're taking this strain over here and taking this strain over here.
Okay.
And they would plant the seeds, get male plants, and they would take the pollen from this strain and crossbreed it with the pollen from the other. It's very simply done. And you catch the pollen on paper, you get a little paintbrush and dust the buds, and that one's going to produce the hybrid seed. Then you plant that seed and you get the new strain.
That's interesting.
Anyone can do it. It's not rocket scientists. It's not DNA splicing. So So as they were doing it, they were the desired result was to get more THC. So all these years they were going, okay, let's try to create strains that have more THC. But unknowingly, they were messing with the ratios of all the other compounds. They were driving down the amount of CBDs. Yeah. So that's why certain strains have different effects on different on treating different symptoms. Different strains perform differently. So that's why we need to do the research. And also now what used to be, I guess, for thousands of years, the cannabis plant was pretty much just a couple different strains, and that was it, depending on its geographic location. But now they've gone, these guys have traveled the world getting seeds and brought them together and started cross breeding them. And there might be some positive effects. Okay. I'm sure there are. But we might have lost some things. And now when people are talking about Monsanto coming in and start genetically modifying it, and then these genetically modified strains get mixed with the natural, we might lose some natural ratios or benefits or just this plant in its natural source. So there's going to be a lot of people. That's why if you find a bag in a box from college that has a bunch of seeds in it, don't throw them out because some seeds will last for a long time, some don't. And if you can maybe get those to a responsible grower, someone who understands what's going on, they might be able to catalog or save these things. Maybe put them in a seed bank for future use. So,
interesting. So, how much more potent is today's weed exactly?
It used to be about 3 or 5%. Now it can be up to over 30%.
Well, according to the Canada's Access to Cannabis for Medical Purposes Regulations program, today's average THC potency and milligrams of THC per gram of cannabis to be between 15 and 17%. That's average, which, according to them, is quite strong. According to High Times magazine in 2017, California's Godfather OG strain was evaluated as boasting a record-breaking 34% THC. By comparison, American studies have determined that in 1995, average potency hovered around 4%. So it's almost 10 times as potent as it was when we were in high school.
Right. Well, and a big thing, too, when we were in high school and you bought weed, you got everything. You got the stems and the leaves and the
just brick weed that Andrew was talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, you hear people talk all the time about the difference in potency, and some people poo-poo it, but the facts are it is, like you said, Phil, 10 times and more potent than it was just 20 years ago.
Well, I mean, I think that's the reason why I stopped using it back in the late 80s, because, when we were in high school, we could dump out a pile on our record and clean it out and do bong hits for an hour, By the time the late 80s came around, you'd get one little hit on a bong and you're done, man. I mean, I'm done for hours. It was just too strong. And
wuss. Yeah.
Well, I was. I became a wuss. I think after years and years of use, I don't know. But I think also, just like you say, Andrew, they were going for so much more THC. Right. They were forgetting about the cannabidiol, and it was making me paranoid.
Which mellows out the buzz, which does affect.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just didn't enjoy it anymore.
Well, I got an article here about Las Vegas.
Woohoo!
Viva!
Which I call Disneyland for grown-ups. And this is something I've heard people complain about. I was in Vegas a few months ago, and, you can buy weed. The problem is there's nowhere to smoke it. And what I mean by that is and this is really screwed up to me. One of the laws, rules, whatever it is, in Vegas is you cannot smoke marijuana in the public anywhere where you can drink. Is that nuts? So you know how in Vegas you can go, like Fairmont, you can walk around with beers. If you're in a location that you can walk around with booze, you can't smoke weed. Now, most of the hotels and the Strip don't allow it. The casinos don't allow it. So
how about in your hotel room?
Most of the hotels don't allow it.
Oh, anywhere.
So it's actually worse than that. They're actually pushing for legislation in Nevada that says anyone with a liquor license cannot have any kind of
Right.
dealings with the cannabis industry.
It's crazy.
I
It's
mean,
insane.
nothing. You
And
can't have anything.
Supposedly, they can write you a ticket for $600. So it's not like a little $25 fine or something.
Well, that's why
Now,
edibles
what's-
are probably very popular.
Yeah, exactly. And vape.
So this is Las Vegas, where
Yeah, I know.
where you can drink
Sin
all
City.
night, gamble all night, buy a prostitute,
buy weed, but you can't
and buy
smoke
weed,
it.
but you cannot smoke it.
But one of the cool things that's come out of this, you obviously you can smoke in your own private residence. So what's happening is the Airbnb business in Vegas is booming because people are advertising on Airbnb. It's cannabis friendly.
That's right.
So
High demand
A
based.
BB&B, a BB&B,
Yes.
bed, breakfast, and bong.
Right.
That's right.
Another great
people
business
are trying
idea.
people that want to go out to Vegas because it's legal and they want to smoke a joint and gamble, they're renting these Airbnb places and getting all tuned up and then driving over to the. But like you said, Andrew, that's why the edibles and even the vape pens are so big there. And I mean, I went to out there and almost some of the dispensaries barely have flour. They have all oils and
Because that's the only thing
edibles
you can really
and
get away
vape
with.
pens.
Well, also,
Exactly.
I'm sure people in Vegas, I'm sure the disposable vape pen is probably flying off the shelves.
It's huge. Yeah, it's huge.
Because, man, you go in the bathroom of your hotel room, put it on the fan, and a vape pen, you can't even smell it anyway. It's steam.
You smell it. That's right. Exactly.
Or you be just walking down the street and it looks like you're vaping like a just
A regular
vaping,
vape pen.
Yeah.
your strawberry
A regular
juice
vape.
or whatever
Right.
they do.
Exactly.
There's a popular restaurant in Maine called Charlotte's Legendary Lobster Pound, where the executive chef is now, I guess, anesthetizing the lobsters, or getting them stoned, treating them with cannabis before they kill them, before they cook them. Apparently, she says it's a more humane death.
More humane than what? Throwing them in a steaming pot of water?
Yeah, just yeah.
Because they're stoned when they get
okay.
killed. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I read that article too, Andrew. It was actually
How does it affect the lobster? I mean,
Yeah. Does it
Or does
taste
it get-
funny or
No,
anything?
I don't. I don't
high in
sound good.
CBD.
Well, it's not going to absorb into. I mean, through a hard shell into the meat. Some smoke in it. It's not going to.
No, he's breathing it. His little gills.
Well, you don't eat the lungs.
That's how I know, but that's how I get it into my system. I breathe it into my gills. I mean lungs.
Are you a rock lobster?
I say just put them in the damn water and steam them. They're fucking lobsters.
Yeah. Fuck it.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Vote Pro Podcast. Once again, we urge you, wherever you are, do what you can, register to vote, contact your public officials, your mayors, your congressmen, your senators, and tell them what you want done in your area. Check us out and check out all our episodes on VoteProPot.com.
Send us an email at votepropot@gmail.com.
Please like and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/VoteProPot.
And if you like what you hear, go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you got your podcasts and give us a rating, hopefully a 5-star rating. And if you're so inclined, write us a comment. Check us out, stay in touch, and vote pro pot.
Wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. But here I am in New York City, hiding out in Central Park, getting kidnapped by the police today sometime before dark. But I wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. The judge looked down upon me, frowned. He said, "Kid, get on your way. Just don't start out your morning with espresso and a J. I said, I wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old sense media at the beginning of the day. Hitched on out to Portland, caught a ride up to BC, took the bus over to the neighborhood to have a bowl with my coffee. Now I'm up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old sense media at the beginning of the day. Smoking good old sense media